From the Foundation Studio on Biloxi's Back Bay, I want to welcome you to SuperTalk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. Because, as I say every single week, we are the capital of the outdoors in America here in Mississippi. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful SuperTalk radio network or on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV. But you might be watching us on YouTube or Facebook or your favorite podcasts. And for that reason, I always give you the date. It's February the 13th, 2023. I'm kind of sad this morning. My son Jordan and his friend John McMahon are headed south to catch some tuna and wahoo, and I'm here. I'm just kidding in a way. I'm happy for them, to be honest with you. The reports offshore for tuna and wahoo have been absolutely incredible. Of course, you know, this time of year, you got to watch the fronts. We just had one come through, and you're looking at 10-foot seas, but it laid down this morning. So their ride out was probably pretty rough, but once they get out there, it's supposed to lay down to 1 foot. So anyway, we'll give you an update on how they did next week, and we'll also, of course, as we always do, post some videos at the SuperTalk Outdoors Facebook page. Hey, before we go to our guests, I want to make a couple of comments. As we know now, we don't talk about this too often, but the legislative session is going on. Politics and wildlife go hand in hand. That's kind of the reality. For good or for bad, like it or not, it's just reality. Let's take the case of efforts to sell whitetail deer in Mississippi and rich high fence owner and deer breeder Billy DeVinny. DeVinny is a very politically connected man, from the governor to the Speaker of the House to the Attorney General and beyond. He's a former commissioner of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, and he's one of a handful of high fence owners who also breed, who seek to become what I call deer kings in Mississippi. As I've said many times on the show, deer belong to the public. Moving away from the North American wildlife conservation model, this principle of the deer belong to the public would ultimately open, as I believe, Pandora's box like it has in other states that have made the selling of deer legal. Outdoorsmen in this state must not let that happen. So when the governor appointed Leonard Bentz, a former public service commissioner who had a long-term relationship with Billy DeVinny going back to his days on the Public Service Commission, and Gary Rhodes, the mayor of Flowood, who incidentally is an excellent leader, but he's also a former high fence owner, I wondered about DeVinny's role in these appointments. So in January of 2022, that's like more than a year ago, Leonard Bentz and Gary Rhodes, this is long after they joined the commission, Bentz made a motion to send a DeVinny letter to the Attorney General about the commission's legal authority to make the sale of whitetail deer in Mississippi legal. It was seconded by Gary Rhodes. The Attorney General subsequently issued an opinion, essentially giving the commission legal authority to approve the sale of whitetail deer if they voted to do so. Lynn Fitch's opinion reversed a well-worded, lengthy previous opinion by Attorney General Jim Hood, which essentially confirmed whitetail deer belong to the people and cannot be sold. Fast forward, 2 bills in the legislative session seeking to make the sale of whitetail deer illegal in this state just died in the House. How is that possible? These bills are the kind of bills that would have been supported by the vast majority of outdoorsmen in this state. These bills have taken the authority to make the sale of whitetail deer, the legal authority to do that, away from the commission, and would have settled this issue once and for all. So how can any bill that would be supported by the vast majority of outdoorsmen in this state be killed by legislative leadership? The answer is politics. They don't want to touch this issue with a 10-foot pole. They don't want bills that could upset wealthy supporters, and they don't want the commission debating issues like the sale of whitetail deer that could cause a firestorm of involvement from the outdoors community. Some say, and some legislative leaders believe, that these kinds of outdoors issues don't play well in an election year. But that seems kind of counterintuitive to me. You would think the legislature would be all over this issue, given the massive support that would have come from the outdoors community, you and me and so many more like us. So making the sale of whitetail deer illegal in this state is actually good policy. What the heck is wrong with our leaders? I can hear my dear friend Governor Haley Barbour saying what he's always strongly believed, and that is good policy makes good politics. Legislative leadership's approach to this does neither. It's a missed opportunity for us all. So it is. So is it possible that one man can have so much clout with leaders in the state? That's kind of scary, isn't it? Clearly, that seems to be the case. So my guess is this issue will lie dormant for a while. In the meantime, I don't expect DeVinny to stop his efforts behind the scenes to make selling a whitetail deer legal in the state. So we should all stay focused and pay very close attention to all of these relationships. And as a former publisher, I'm naturally curious. And I have many questions I will seek answers to. So I'm going to keep asking questions. That is for sure. So I'm going to stay focused, and I hope you will stay focused too. I pray that the legislature puts this issue to bed once and for all next year. So now let's shift gears. I want to welcome my friend Robbie Kroger. He refers to himself as a native to South Africa, proud American, rooted Mississippian, and a member of the hunting community. His global nonprofit, Blood Origins, has become, as he puts it, the spear tip to hunting issues on a global stage. Welcome to SuperTalk Outdoors, Robbie.
No, Ricky, thank you so much for the opportunity, man. I don't listen to you very often, but is it fair to say that I may be the first South African on outdoor, Super Talk Outdoors with you?
You know what? I have to go back and check closely, but maybe you are.
I'll take that. I'll take that as the.
No, for sure, man. And your story is really cool, and we're gonna talk about that. But right off the bat, and we're gonna break it all down. Right
Sure.
off the bat, what's your elevator speech when you're telling someone about Blood Origins? What in like a paragraph or two? How do you say what it is you do?
Ricky, it's very, very simple. Hunting has a PR problem. We have a perception problem for the non-hunting majority that keeps our lifestyle, this privilege that we get to have in America and around the world, in play. So all we do at Blood Origins is change perceptions around what hunting does for people, for wildlife, for communities all around the world, and then also changes perceptions of who a hunter is. End of story. We build the content for the non-hunting majority. Yes, hunters can take something away from it. We hope that they do, and we hope that they share that piece of content, that piece of narrative, that informational segment or seed with their communities that are full of non-hunters.
Well, I've watched when you say, for example, that you've become sort of the spear tip to hunting issues on a global stage. Your experience, and we're going to come back and tell that story, but your experience in South Africa, the sort of the road that brought you to Mississippi, gave you some passions, and it enabled you really to speak about global issues. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you love Mississippi. You sort of changed. You picked this as a place to live. And we're happy to have you here. Hey, before we go any further, you mentioned you heard me mention at the beginning of the show this notion of sale and transport of deer.
Yeah.
One of the issues is about being able to manage the deer herd for things not just for CWD, but things like CWD.
Right.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and these are Robbie's opinions, and essentially I do speak for Blood Origins, and this is sort of Blood Origins' position in that, I'm a scientist, right? I look at data, I look objectively at how things operate and use the science in the understanding, as you started talking about, that politics and policy and science have to dovetail, but typically are not dominated by science. Otherwise, this whole world would be dominated by professors that know nothing about nuance, essentially. So there's plenty data, there's plenty science to show, especially in the CWD world that we live in today, that the transfer of live animals from areas that are deer breeders or high fence facilities to others is a vector for CWD. And as I spoke to the National Deer Alliance and several others, CWD could be the anchor that could sink hunting in the future. And the reason I say that is that because CWD is in the same disease class family as mad cow disease, there's been no proof, no data, no research, no science to show any sort of interaction of CWD with the human sort of mad cow disease type family, okay? But it is an encephalopathy kind of scenario. So you've got to make sure that there's a thing there that we've got to be wary about.
Let's do this, and we'll sort of close that thought on the other side of the break. But when we get on the other side of the break, we'll continue our conversation with Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins. And what a story this is! I mean, his story, what brought him here, his incredible education, and the ultimate sort of advent of a nonprofit called Blood Origins is a fascinating thing. I suspect that Robbie and I will be coming back together again on a regular basis here on Super Talk Outdoors. Let me thank you for being here, and we'll see you on the other side.
Carry on, I'll carry on, Mississippi.
Leading the conversation on Mississippi's outdoors. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We have Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins. And I want to do a shout out to my friend Chris Gurris, who introduced Robbie and me. Chris is an absolutely incredible friend. He's also a board member for the foundation. And we love the outdoors together. But he's one of the most passionate outdoors people I know. He's a special dude, isn't he, Robbie?
Yeah, he's a good guy. I don't know Chris very well. I've had a couple of interactions with him over the last 10 years or so. Seems like a really nice guy.
He is a super guy. So we were talking about the vectors related to CWD.
Yeah.
And the sale and transport of whitetail deer. Some people, Ted Nugent likes to say, I don't know if you sparred with him, but he likes to say CWD's always been here and it's always going to be here. And a lot of people buy into that argument. How do you overcome that argument that is not based in science?
I don't know the history of CWD to be able to speak to it very, very, very well. And I've learned through my scientific career, as well as this little stint in Blood Origins thus far, that if there's something you don't know much about, don't say anything about it. So I'm pretty good at recognizing where I know my informational failures, and that is one of them. So I don't know the history of CWD at all. What I do know is that it is a very pervasive, situation that is affecting multiple wildlife resources across the United States, that with some work from the person who's hunting can alleviate it, can minimize it, can reduce its volatility in the resource, as well as its impact on humans. And that's what, testing and making sure that you're doing all the things that you need to do in terms of discarding of bodies and carcasses and all that kind of stuff. I do want to say this, though, and before we got on here, we talked about a little bit in that, the live sale of deer certainly has a data component to it from a CWD perspective. But a lot of people sort of will wrap into the fold the idea of high fence hunting tied in with it. And those are two separate issues for me. High fence hunting is really a mechanism by which people hunt here in the United States. It's a very prevalent way of hunting in South Africa that allows you to manage animals, allows you to manage the resource appropriately to the desire of that individual landowner, whether it's an age-class management style or it's a whatever it is. High fence hunting is around. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. A lot of people get into the fair chase argument when it comes to high fence hunting, and I can give you multiple examples of high fence hunts that were 100 times harder than a low fence hunt. So it's just the idea of escape that folds this whole fair chase thing into sort of an embroiled argument, left, right, and center. So
yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you. In fact, I've heard from a number. There are about 120 plus high fence owners in Mississippi, and I've heard from a bunch of them who don't like the way that these issues are getting connected.
Correct.
They're not for the sale of whitetail deer. They have a high fence because they want to be able to manage the herd. They're not having arguments about who the deer belong to or anything like that. It's just purely they want to be able to manage the herd to a greater age, and they enjoy doing that. And They're really not happy with the fact that we're having this breeder conversation within the context of the high fence, and hopefully we can put all this to bed, and it doesn't hurt the high fence hunters in the state before it's all said and done. You know what's interesting? If I read your story and I've studied you, I've watched lots of your media, and you are doing an amazing job. I come from the digital media background. And so I'm very attentive to the reality that you've worked really hard to be a social influencer, and you're playing on multiple platforms across a bunch of different topics, and you're not afraid to weigh in on controversial stuff. I'm sure sometimes you probably regret it, but the thing that stands out the most about you is that when you combine your experience in South Africa, about this privilege we have in America to hunt. And in Mississippi, the work that we've done in Mississippi to buy so much hunting public land so that anyone can have access. And we do such a great job through the department of managing so many different categories of wildlife for hunting purposes. When you look at what's happening in America, when you look at what's happening in Mississippi, then you combine that to your experience in South Africa, it enables you to really have a foundational appreciation for what we're doing in America, doesn't it?
Well, that's the key, is that when I think about why we fight every single day, why we get into these sort of ideological discussions. I don't like to call them arguments because I purposely ask hard questions. Like this morning, we purposely asked the hard question of what is the definition of public land? Is it access for all, anytime, with no cost? Or is there a little bit of cost? So it's really making people think. And when I think about what I didn't have, and that now that my boys have growing up here in Mississippi, Tennessee, America, it's not a right that Americans have. And if you don't know anything else, you don't have a different perspective on what life could be like, you don't really understand the privilege. And one of the examples I like to use is if either of us decided to walk out of our studios right now and go 20 minutes in a certain direction, we'd come across a piece of public ground that we could walk on. That is ours. That is actually, a lot of people say it's the Americans, right? It's not. It's actually the globes, because anyone could walk on that. Somebody from England arrives in Mississippi tomorrow could walk on that land, and they could, not they, but you can use you could get a loaded weapon on that piece of ground, and you could take a resource that was available legally in a regulated fashion on that piece of property. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And if you didn't know that, and you didn't come to this idea of fighting for hunting's narrative without that perspective, I think it wouldn't be as powerful as what we've created at Blood Origins, number one. And then number two, we make it a very clear point that we're not a ultra red, conservative, whatever you want to call it, type entity like most hunting entities are looked at, nor are we blue, liberal, and democratic. We're in the middle, because to us, it doesn't matter if you're red, you're white, you're blue, you're purple. If you're a hunter, you're a hunter.
Yeah, Robbie, I say that all the time, that the outdoors is the one real opportunity. The one real opportunity we have a chance to put all that noise and political noise and other noise aside, and really sort of immerse ourselves together in this incredible resource that we have access to. And I think, truthfully, we can take it for granted. You know that. And as a result of that, by taking it for granted, we don't tend to hear sort of this anti-hunting movement that sort of percolates and becoming more powerful and more loud in America. And we should hear it, because what we have to say grace over in America is truly special. But the numbers are not working in our favor, and we've better be paying attention to it. And really, at the end of the day, that's why Blood Origins was founded, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was founded to really make sure that we didn't lose this lifestyle that we have, right? And you're right, the numbers in terms of percentage are going down. in terms of our numbers, our hunter numbers stay about even constantly. We're in like the 11 to 13 million number range, around there. The percentage is dropping precipitously because the American population is growing. So in which we used to be 11, 12%, we're now 4%, because 13 million out of, 200 million is a certain percentage, but 13 million out of 350 or 360 million is a much lower percentage.
It'll be interesting to see, the pandemic created an opportunity for people to want to go in the outdoors, want to be out in the clean air and do their thing. And if you look at the number of people who were turkey hunting and deer hunting and duck hunting during the pandemic, it went up pretty dramatically. It'd be interesting to see if there's a long-term impact from the pandemic of people sort of coming back to the roots of enjoying the outdoors. And I'm sure, we'll have to let some time pass to see if that's the case. But if you go back to your experience in South Africa, you really know what it looks like. I mean, rich men had the opportunity to hunt there, but the average person in South Africa, in spite of all this vast land, did not have that opportunity. Sort of contrast what you came from in South Africa to what you're experiencing in America.
Well, I would say this. I don't want to put one model up against another, because they both have great components to them, right? They're just very, very different models. So here in America, you have the North American wildlife model, where the resource, the public resource, as we discussed, belongs to the people, belongs to the state, essentially. And it's a great model. But when you look at the South African model is very much a private land, value-centric model for wildlife. So if that wildlife is on your land, it belongs to you, number one. Number two, it is the thing that has caused wildlife to absolutely boom in South Africa.
We'll come back to that and the responsibility that hunters have in managing the herd. And it's undeniable. The data is absolutely undebatable. When we come back with Robbie, we'll continue our conversations about the evolution of Blood Origins and this mission that he is on. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins with us, and we were talking about sort of contrasting, not necessarily trying to say one's better than the other, but they're different. We're contrasting America and his experience in South Africa. And the point that he was about to make, that he was making when we went to break, is the role that hunters played in managing the resource and why that's so darn important. And I saw your post about the rhinos and what's happening in Africa around the rhinos. And this sort of plays into that argument. So why don't you continue?
Yeah. So both situations. So let's use America, North American wildlife model, and South Africa, a privatized resource model. Both were in sort of not dire straits, but America in turn of the 1900s, very little wildlife across the board. Every single wildlife species today, elk, antelope, all your duck species, turkeys, all have rebounded because of hunters, because of regulations, and because of laws, essentially, that have come into place to make sure that that resource perpetuates. And that's all because of hunters and hunting. In Africa, in South Africa specifically, in the mid-1970s, there was only 500,000 head of wildlife in Africa. In South Africa, I keep saying Africa, in South Africa. And due to drought situations, as well as cattle prices and sheep prices not looking the way that they were doing because of the drought, people started looking at wildlife a little differently. They're like, oh, wow, what if that kudu could actually replace the cost of 5 cows or 10 cows? All of a sudden, the law changed such that that kudu belonged to you, Ricky, and you could do whatever you wanted with that kudu, i.e., you could sell it at a game auction, you could get someone to look at it, take photographs of it, or you could get someone to come hunt it. Today in South Africa, the numbers, it's a pretty big range, but there's between 21 and 26 million head of wildlife today in South Africa. And that's only because of the value proposition that is added to that piece of wildlife, okay? That is the difference. And so, yes, population benefits as a result of hunting, job benefits, GDP benefits, economic benefits. you go out of South Africa into the more wilderness, rural, very rural places in Africa, and this is the same situation happening in the rural places in Argentina, Tajikistan, Pakistan, you name it. But communities are benefiting from the value of this wildlife for livelihoods, for medical access, for schools, for education. I can keep listing them, Ricky. And then there's the intangibles that we don't ever talk about. Joy, hope, relationships, the things that make us human because of hunting.
It's just strong. You know, when you were telling that story, I remember I'm a diver. And if I'm diving in somewhere like Turks and Caicos and you know, Grand Turks and the amazing reefs that they have around there and the unbelievable amount of species in this ecosystem, it's incredible to see. But then you go to somewhere like Jamaica and dive a reef in Jamaica and you see virtually no fish. And the difference between the two is one is protected and the other is not. In most cases where, and this is what happened in America, you go back to, you said the early 1900s when you've got people who are killing wildlife to eat and they're killing them to sell, and there's great stories about that. It is, if it's not managed, we will lose it, and that's the story, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. I would take it one step further, that there's always a value element to it. And if it's not valued, the phrase that is used in Africa specifically is, if it pays, it stays. If it's valued, it will stay, just like your coral reef example, right? If there's nobody coming to dive, if there's nobody coming to look, if there's nobody coming to do all those things, what do you think is going to happen to the reef? The locals will probably outfish it or overfish it or take everything out because there's value to that fish in the fish markets. Same thing with wildlife. Is there value to the animal being where it's at, doing what it does? If not, there's no value for that lion, there's no value for that elephant, and human-wildlife conflicts specifically with those animals are high. What do you think is going to happen? All these bans that are being proposed, ban the import of trophies, ban it, and it's indirectly banning hunting in these countries. The idea, their foundational proposition behind these bans is, we're going to save wildlife. Hunters aren't going to go, they're not going to kill. Yes, you're right. But now that animal has no value. And so instead of one lion being taken out every year for $80,000 US, 20 lions are dying. Young adults, females, male, it doesn't matter. So is that what you wanted? That's what we're fighting, right? And so if to take this sort of back to a sort of policy level, right? A lot of people interact with us and they're like, I'm never going to go hunt Africa. Why should I even worry about that? Oh, elephant hunting. Oh my gosh, I can't believe someone would go hunt an elephant. Well, the same thing happens here. If you're not worried about the low-hanging fruit being chipped off from a hunting lifestyle perspective, and Africa is the low-hanging fruit, elephants are the low-hanging fruit, what do you think's next?
Yeah, so the anti-hunting movement is a global movement. You know that well. So Blood Origins had to be a global organization. You know, bringing that back to Mississippi, I think about, some have estimated that the outdoors lifestyle in Mississippi contributes as much as $8 billion to the economy. Think about that for a second. Think
crazy.
about the amount of enjoyment and the goods and services that go with that, the fact that we have the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks that manages it. We should protect that. We should protect that with as much energy as we can muster, because it hits on so many different cylinders, not just our personal enjoyment and that aspect of it, but it's so much more than that. That's when you start talking about the value equation here in Mississippi, that's what it is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Ricky, we talk I got this series of content that's coming. We haven't released any of it yet, but I think it's sort of a game-changing piece of content called Connecting the Dots. And what connecting the dots means is there's a dot, which is the action of the hunt. When someone kills an animal, it's inherent to hunting. From a blood origins perspective, I don't focus on that dot, because the hunting industry has done that for 30 years, and that's why we have a PR problem today. All right. So what I want to focus on is all of the dots that are connected to that action that happened downstream. The game processor that's in Canton, Mississippi, that is employing 8, 9, 10 people, all right? Then if you look at that individual that is one in the employment in Canton, Mississippi, he probably stops every morning at a local gas station and has a coffee and has a conversation with the general owner of the gas station. Wow, that's another dot. Oh, did you know that owner of that gas station, because he's obviously getting revenue from this individual, he's able to attend church and give X, Y, and Z at church. And all of a sudden, you've got these 3, 4, 5, 6 dots that the 4th, 5th, 6th dot, they don't even know about the action of the hunt, but they're indirectly connected because of that action. That $8 billion industry has so many spider webs and tentacles that are so pervasive into society that the idea of removing hunting, it's not, look, it probably will never happen in Mississippi, right? But you look at the fringes, the New Yorks, the Californias, the Washington states, the Oregons, that's being removed, right? That's being eroded. Then it's a reality. And it's almost like, well, why are we even in this position, Ricky? It's because we've forgotten about the benefits and consequences of the action of hunting.
I love putting it in that terms, because then you can connect the dots back to people who may or may not love hunting or be close to hunting. They can begin to appreciate that this is more than sort of a generational love of the outdoors. It is an activity that connects us all, and to the extent that you can understand and appreciate that, it's going to be better for all of us that we've had these conversations. And so I get what Blood Origins is all about. What's interesting about your story is that you grew up in South Africa, went to school in South Africa, you came to Ole Miss.
Yes, sir.
To get into a PhD program. And it was an interesting degree that you got in. Did you have a passion for all of this, coming into this, or did it sort of begun to? Well, I tell you what, coming to the end of the segment, we'll come back on the other side. But the question I have is, where did this passion evolve? Was it just this sum total of all these experiences, and then Blood Origins was born, and then it eventually became a nonprofit, and now you're this incredible, articulate, and passionate spokesperson. I want to tell that story when we come out on the other side. We're visiting with the founder of Blood Origins, and we'll be back after this.
I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on. I'll carry on.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk, Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I'm visiting with my friend Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins, And gosh, man, I knew, from watching your videos and watching your social media presence and the work that you're doing, again, across many digital platforms, I feel your passion and your ability to articulate. There's something about the South African accent that adds to the clarity of it all. It's a beautiful accent. But your story is really incredible. What brought you to the States? How did you get to Ole Miss?
Yeah, we don't have enough time to get through that story. But I just, it was a random selection, definitely divine intervention, led me to Ole Miss. Led me to meeting my wife, who has a PhD in 18th century Gothic literature. She's a horror writer. you talked about passion. Like, did I have this passion coming into America? As a young boy, as all young men in South Africa, you grow up wanting to be a game ranger. So I was very much a part of the outdoors, had an honors Bachelor of Science, a master's in the outdoors, took game drives, was a Land Rover jockey for people like Americans wanting to go see all the big five. And so I've got a conservation restoration bend to me. I also have it in my blood. My great grandfather on my grandmother's side was the first forester of the Sachsenwald for the first prince in Germany. And so he looked after the forest and he looked after the resource. So that element is inside me. It's inside my DNA. It's inside my blood. And only when I got introduced to hunting by a good old 6'5", 250-pound redneck called Landon Lee in Oxford, Mississippi, that I understood what hunting was. And when I then evolved to have my own boys, 11 and 9 now, 2 savages, and to understand what they have in front of them that I never had access to, that I never had, just because of the circumstances of me growing up and where I grew up, I was like, this is something that I need to do. This is something I need to fight for. This is something I need to talk about. And yes, you're right. Would Blood Origins be where it's at today without a South African accent? No, I don't think so. And our what's the word I'm looking for here? Our demeanor is very respectful. Our demeanor is very gentlemanly. Our demeanor is very like, you can call us every name under the sun. And it's even happened today already. I'm never going to retort or respond that way back to you because I'm not really trying to change that individual who's interacting with me. It's the thousands of people that are watching me do it. They're like, wow, I never thought a hunter would be like that, which is, again, the whole point of Blood Origins, changing narratives about who we are as hunters, what hunting is doing for people, for wildlife, for communities here in the Mississippi, America, the globe, you name it. We've got a big challenge in front of us, but we're up for it.
What's interesting, when I was publisher, and this is before social media, people used to ask me, why would I get in the content stream of our newspaper online? Because, I would usually be engaging with someone who's hard-headed and not going to change their position. And I used to say, and actually at the time, I would say, it's not the person I'm debating with. It's the 7 others that aren't saying anything. Well, this is before social media. Today, when you get into the comment stream, it's really literally the thousands of others who are paying attention. And, that's one thing about if you had to compare sort of a cultural manifestation of your South African, past and Mississippi, is that there's a kindness in Mississippi generally that people here, they do want to debate, but I'm speaking specifically about Mississippi. We have respect for one another. We're extraordinarily resilient. We've been through so many challenges over a lot of years. And people don't mind respectful debate. Now, I understand that social media has changed that dramatically because it enables people who are in their pajamas to engage in a conversation they would not necessarily engage with you if you were meeting face to face with them. But having those conversations are important, and you do, as a result of having them in a respectful way, even if the other person is not being respectful, you have an opportunity to really show people that you're not going about this in a mean-spirited way. You're going about this in a way that educates people, that shares your passion. And passion has a tendency to be something that impacts people in a positive way, usually. And you get that, don't you?
Absolutely. That's the whole point, is if you're not passionate about something, and if you not want to, I would add optimism on top of the passion.
Yeah.
Then what's the point, right?
I have, you can tell from the way I have this conversation, I'm generally a very positive person. But as a publisher, I didn't steer away from fights either. I have very thick skin, and I'm willing to have that debate, and I'm willing but I'm going to do my homework, buddy. And if you convince me otherwise, I'll change my point of view.
100%.
I'll change my point of view. But I'm not going to be mean-spirited about it. Gosh, I can't wait to have you back. There's so much to talk about. There's so much there's so many ways that you and I, through our own experiences, can share and have discussion maybe about some things we don't necessarily agree about. They can help really bring about some awareness in people about why we better be focused on the value proposition around our wildlife. If we don't focus on it, we may lose the privilege. So God bless you, my friend. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Humbled. Thank you.
You bet. This has been Robbie Kroger from Blood Origins, and believe me, we're going to have him back. As I always end every show, be safe in the outdoors. Don't drop your guard for a minute. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week about tuna and wahoo fishing. We'll see you next week.